Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, What Your IT Service Desk Needs to Focus on in 2020 and Beyond, featuring guest speaker Stephen Mann, who is an IT Service Management expert and Principal Analyst and Content Director at ITSM.tools. We're really excited to have him here today. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Brian Hood, who will briefly cover our remote support and endpoint privilege management solutions after Stephen's portion, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. Hello, a virtual wave to you all. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. A reminder that your lines are muted, but I love keeping these interactive, so please submit your questions live through the GoToWebinar console. And if we have time left at the end, I will host a live Q&A with our experts. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now. The slides can also be immediately downloaded via the handout section in the console. Again, you will find that to the side of your screen. Finally, if you are attending for CPE credits with ISACA, you can locate and download the attendance verification document in the handout section in order to submit proof that you attended today's webinar. And if you're attending for CPE credits with ISC Squared, your CPEs will automatically be applied to your account within 4 to 6 weeks. So be on the lookout for those credits. Okay, so all of our housekeeping items are out of the way, so I'd like to welcome Stephen to the line because he has a lot to cover. So I don't want to waste any more time talking. Let's get Stephen on the line and talking. So Stephen, welcome aboard, and please take it away. Excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for everyone for attending. I'm going to do what I usually do. I'm going to start with what I'm going to cover in what's going to be close to 40 minutes. Here we go, get my slides going. So I'll start with some quick scene setting. So I'll talk to the current challenges and opportunities for IT service desks. Then I'm going to go through 8 areas for service desks to focus on in 2020, which I've grouped, hopefully rather conveniently, into 3 areas: getting your IT service desk motivations right, better enabling IT support personnel, and then thirdly, going beyond traditional IT supports. Along the way, I'm going to share 8 related tips, all for improving your IT service desk. And then I'll finish with a quick key takeaway slide and then return again later if we have time for questions and answers. So starting with the scene setting, I'd like to think that this slide's title is a dual purpose, to recognize that the challenges that I have listed are not only common across IT service desk teams, but they're also challenges that have been around for a while, should we say. So, for example, things like the fact that we're getting more and more IT support tickets, and they're probably going to need to be handled with minimal budget uplift, or that because IT is more important to business operations and also outcomes too, any IT issues are likely to hurt organizations more than they've ever done in the past. Then there are the higher employee expectations, which I'll come back to in a while, where we as corporate service providers are expected to deliver similar capabilities to the consumer world experiences that employees are having in their personal lives. And for me, the real biggie, which is the 4th bullet on my slide, is understanding and then positively acting on what your organization really needs from its IT support capabilities, i.e. the service desk and everything else that works around that. And while much of this might seem perpetually challenging in that it seems to have been around for an awfully long time, for me, there are thankfully new and evolving opportunities for improvement that's going to help. And these are very much what I'm going to be covering in the 8 areas that I have in the main part of my slide deck. And before I go through those 8 areas, I just quickly wanted to put up a slide, well, 2 slides, because I couldn't get them all on one slide and still make them visible to everyone. So these are the 3 groups, and within that, the 8 areas that I'm going to talk to in the next 35 minutes or so, depending on how long I've taken so far. So we've got focus on value, upping the employee experience. We've also got empowering employees, and by that I mean the IT support employees, reducing high volume, low value tasks, and also additionally leveraging technology-based augmentation, driving the right behaviors, And for me, this is very much about measuring the right things, amongst other things. And then the stuff that didn't fit on that slide, finally, the two final things in terms of going beyond traditional IT support is the sharing of capabilities beyond IT, and also the role the service desk should be playing in information security. Some of these titles might seem a little bit weird for now, but hopefully they'll become clearer as I get to them. And in terms of that list, or the big list, and then the shorter list, I think it's important to appreciate that this is a list of potential areas to focus on. I'm not saying that all of these are going to be relevant for your IT service desk and organization. And I'm sure, and hopefully a few heads will nod, that most IT service desks, given the limitations, particularly from a resource and financial perspective, would struggle to try and address all of these things at once anyway. So that's a little caveat at the end of the list, that I'm not saying run and do all of these things straight away. These are just 8 things that I'd like you to think about and consider in terms of what can be done to improve your IT service desk during the rest of 2020 and hopefully beyond that. So starting with the first of these, for me, there's no doubt that value has become a more and more used term over the last decade in IT service management. I remember doing a presentation, I think it was 9 years ago at ITSM UK, called "Is Anyone Questioning Your Value?" And for me at the time, it was a little bit ahead of its time, and thankfully since then, we're having more and more conversations around value. And if you've seen ITIL 4, you'll see that has gone all in on the concept of value creation or co-creation. You've got the value, the service value system, the service value chain, and with that, you're building value streams. You've got the guiding principle of focus on value, which is probably what I stole this title from. And then each of the 34 ITIL 4 practices are described in terms of the part they play in the service value chain. And hopefully you're also already seeing this in terms of business focus and practices, so not just in IT, where conversations and also actions are being elevated above what things cost, the traditional way that we've looked at things, to better understand the business value that's created by what we do. So it's more about what we achieve, the outcomes, than what we actually do and what it costs. And I can't get away from the fact that service desks have traditionally been seen as a cost center, but thankfully now, as it says on my slide, savvy organizations are starting to take a value-based view of their IT support capabilities and expenditure, and looking more at the operations and the outcomes rather than the costs. So it delves me or drives me into a number of questions around value on the IT service desk. And before I even get to this, I need to hold my hand up and say, it's not easy trying to demonstrate the value of an IT service desk. And one of the reasons is because it's probably going to be different for different organizations, depending on how they are structured and the strategies involved and the funding available too. And then different stakeholders are going to have different requirements or different perceptions of what value is. So please bear that in mind, when I ask the questions that I'm not going to throw out an answer. So, the first question for me is, do you know how your IT service desk adds value or co-creates value for your organization? And I would suggest most don't, because it's not a way that we've previously thought about what we do. Previously, we might be looking at the IT support or the issue resolution side of things and look at volumes and speeds, etc. Maybe a bit of customer satisfaction, but mostly it's about the mechanics of providing IT support rather than what we ultimately achieve through what we do. And also how your IT service desk strategies and the resulting operations bring about the value. Do your performance measures, say, allow you to better ascertain the value you're creating or co-creating, and also identify opportunities based on maybe issues that are seen to drive up that value, or even just to better communicate that value. So for me, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked on a value theme around your IT service desk and how it operates, and ultimately the outcomes it delivers to your organizations. And for me, the important thing here is that if we don't know the answers to these and similar questions, then we're probably going to get caught out, because these questions will ultimately get asked. These things come around eventually, and we all get asked the same difficult questions. And if we jump back to the question I just had about whether we have the right performance measures, even if it's something as simple as sense checking whether your existing IT service desk metrics are measuring the right things, i.e. from a business perspective rather than just an IT perspective, it's going to help. And then it's going to help to drive the right behaviors in IT support, which I'm going to come back to anyway. It's going to help us to identify those issues and to support improvement activities, again, that I've already referred to. And ultimately, it's going to put us in a better position to demonstrate the business value of the IT service desk and what it achieves for the organization as a whole. And this could be something about increasing productivity of the employees or customers that we support, say, rather than what we've traditionally looked at, the average cost per ticket or something similar, average handling time, say. And I'm going to come back to employee experience next. But first, I think it's worth consolidating what I've just rambled about into a single tip related to focusing on value. And that's that we can't self-determine what our business stakeholders value, that we need to ask them, we need to have a conversation, a dialogue, and we need to ask all of them, because as I've already alluded to, different stakeholders will perceive value differently and they will value different things. And importantly, and it doesn't say it on the slide, we need to keep asking them. It's not a one-time thing to do, because what they value is no doubt going to change over time. Now, hopefully me talking to that all made sense, because I'm going to do it another 7 times. I'm going to hopefully rattle through these to make sure I finish on time to allow Brian enough time to go through his slides. So next we have up in the employee experience, and this is really picking back up on what I just spoke about in terms of employee productivity in the main, because this is where the thinking around delivering superior employee experience has moved to or congregated at in the last year or so. That while employee experience can cover many things, including the level of employee happiness with IT support, research is showing that what matters most to employees in terms of the experience is being able to make progress every day toward the work that they believe is most important. Now, that was a quote that I stole from a 2019 Forrester research blog, and I just love the fact that it calls out that employee experience is ultimately about that employee productivity, or trying to reduce the level of lost employee productivity, and also the removal of what I guess industry analysts like to call friction in the workplace. Just to extend this a little bit further, you've probably gone all over it anyway, which is a danger that happens when you put your slide up and continue to talk about something else first. The data on here is from a Finnish employee experience management, a Finnish employee experience management company called Happy Signals. So I've done a little link to where you can pick it up at the bottom of the slide. And they measure 2 facets of employee experience: happiness, employee happiness, and lost productivity. And what this shows, I think, is very interesting to anyone that hasn't seen it before. Firstly, the sample size, that is close to 300,000 pieces of end user feedback between May and November 2019. But also, if you actually look at some of the numbers on the chart, you've got your 5 most common accessing communication channels there. So your phone, your email, your self-service, chat, and walk-in. And right in the middle, which is pretty convenient for me to point to, is you will notice that self-service portal gives the lowest level of employee happiness at +61. And also it has the highest level of lost productivity at close to 4 hours. And the important thing is, we probably wouldn't see this if all we're looking at is customer satisfaction. If we're sending out customer satisfaction questionnaires and we're asking about the mechanics of IT support, we might miss this. Other than if, say, we have very low end user or employee uptake of self-service, we're probably not going to appreciate that something that we've introduced to do things like speed up resolutions or the provision of information, to reduce costs, to maybe improve the employee experience, isn't exactly doing what it should be doing. So bringing this slide and section to an end with another tip, I think the most important thing we can do to start here relative to employee experience is to really understand what employee experience is and what it means for your IT service desk, and also the people who they're serving, most importantly, for the people that they're serving, supporting, in terms of your organization's employees or external customers, if you want to flip it to a customer experience perspective. And this concept of the importance of employee experience also relates to our IT support employees, and it takes us nicely into the section about empowering the IT support personnel, or being better in terms of providing an environment for them to work in. And as I've just said, what I've just covered in terms of employee experience also applies to your service desk personnel. And we need to understand what's helping them and also what's hindering them as they go about their daily work and their daily tasks. And the first thing to look at is they're going to be highly dependent on your IT service management tool and its capabilities, and also the ways of working, things like process flows, knowledge management capabilities, time-saving automation, all of that stuff that we like to talk about in IT service management. And I'll return to that automation pretty shortly as well. But for me, the three things on my slide here are important aspects of employee empowerment that I think we need to touch on before I jump to things like automation. And the first is getting people focused on and involved in the most important work. And there are a number of different facets to this. It needs to be based on their skills and capabilities and the context of creating business value, of course. But hopefully we can allow our IT support personnel to play to their strengths. We've got the square people in the square holes, round people in round holes, etc. But also allowing them to do the work that they like to do. But probably most importantly these days is to allow them to feel that they're actively contributing to business success, that there can often be a disconnect between the work we do and how it ultimately impacts the business results or the business outcomes that are hopefully going up and off the chart. The second thing is something called intelligent disobedience, which you may or may not have heard of. It's where IT support staff are empowered to make informed decisions on what to do next based on what they think is best for the customer or the employee and the organization. And it's a concept that's taken from the training of guide dogs or seeing dogs. I'm not sure entirely what terminology to use. And it's based around the thinking that the dog, or in this case a person, with the most up-to-date information for the dog or the person that's in the mix of it, that they're best placed to judge if the normal rules apply or not. So the normal service desk policies, even the normal service desk scripts, whether these apply or not. Extending that seeing dog or guide dog example, if a blind person wants to cross a road and they hear the safe to cross signal, so it's sounding, but the guide dog doesn't move, then the dog has decided that that instruction that normally tells you to cross the road is currently irrelevant. And it's likely because a speeding car is currently hurtling towards the red stop light and it's not going to stop. And therefore that piece of intelligent disobedience has likely saved a life, maybe more than one. So it might seem a little bit serious, but the same thinking and the same concept can be used to empower IT support personnel to actually do what's best in the moment. And then thirdly, well-being, and it's been a big year, or 2019 I think was a big year for well-being for me, in that we ran a couple of surveys that looked at the well-being of people in IT service management, so not just IT support personnel. And what our research found is that 71% of survey respondents have been adversely affected well-being-wise by working in IT, which is pretty high. And if you want to sort of turn the dial up, 21% say that they've been considerably affected in terms of their well-being, their personal well-being, by their job. And what makes it sound worse for me, because sometimes you can get lost in percentages, that's 1 in every 5 people has been seriously affected in terms of well-being by working in IT. So picking up on this is my tip in terms of better empowering IT support people, that this year surely has to be the year in which we finally take the well-being of our IT service desk staff more seriously, especially when things like AI and automation, which again I'll come back to, are taking away many of the simpler IT support tasks. So everything that service desk analysts or agents, whatever you wish to call them, are dealing with is going to be more complicated, more time consuming, and there's going to be less things on which we can coast, for want of a better word. The easy things, the password reset, say, they're going to be gone. The technology is doing it. And the service desk analyst role is potentially going to get harder than it's ever been. And I did have something else I was going to say on this, but I think given how slowly I'm going through these, I'm going to jump through straight to AI and automation. And you'll probably notice that I'm not talking about AI or automation in the main. I'm talking about the two in tandem, because I see that as AI adoption continues in IT service management, for many of the common use cases, while AI might make decisions on what to do next, it's the automation that actually does that next thing. So it's AI and automation that's making the difference, not just the AI or the automation alone. What I prefer to do is to split AI and automation between the heavy lifting, so where the technology is replacing the manual elements of tasks or even processes. And then you've also got the heavy thinking, where the technology augments or extends our human knowledge and decision-making capabilities in the main. And it's not a black and white thing, so don't sit there thinking that it's one or the other. It can be grey, but I think it helps to differentiate between the AI and automation enabled capabilities that are available in terms of IT support right now. If we look at the things that in this instance reduce the high volume, low value tasks, and those that I'll cover next. So some examples of these. In fact, you've probably already read them if you're skimming through my slides as I'm talking. The big one that we're seeing is the intelligent ticketing processing. And this is where the technology, the machine learning, rather than just calling it AI, best calling it machine learning and automation, is being used for the automated categorization, prioritization, assignment, and potentially even the actioning of incidents and requests. And it's all done based on historical data patterns. Or number 2 on the list, use the chat line as a first line of employer customer help. But another one that we don't see as much, but it's available from a knowledge management perspective, is the use of intelligent email autoresponders that basically provide the most likely solutions as the first response to submitted emails. And ultimately, all of this is all about freeing up IT support staff time such that they can do higher value adding work. And slightly different for point number 5, where we jump into leveraging the technology-based augmentation. But there's a similar tip on both sides, or a tip that is applicable to both sides. So I was going to cover them together once I've covered the leveraging technology-based augmentation. It probably would have been helpful if I'd actually put both tips on this slide, but I'm learning as I go along, I think, with this deck. So in the same way that we've traditionally tried to make IT support staff better versions of themselves, this can be extended further with AI and automation. And the term that the industry seems to have adopted is people augmentation, and it's why I used the word augmentation earlier on. And there are 2 great examples that I have on my slide, whether it be virtual agents, and this is where service desk analyst knowledge and capabilities are extended. And it isn't just the provision of relevant knowledge, say, when it's needed. It can also be prompts or automatic actions, such as closing completed tickets. And in terms of the AI-assisted decision support and trending, sometimes it's easy to jump to problem management as being a great opportunity to go through those large data sets, but it's also things like demand planning and staffing optimization. And really for me, here the technology-assisted analysis of the historical data patterns is going to better identify what's important and open to improvement than what we could do as a human brain or a collection of human brains alone. And in terms of the two tips, given that I'm doing 4 and 5 at once, the first tip is that we need to deal with the elephant in the room as soon as possible if we haven't done so already. And that's how staff are currently feeling about the introduction of AI and automation-enabled capabilities and the impact that that might have on their jobs. And importantly for me, a key communication point here is that these capabilities that we're seeing being introduced and being adopted and used are actually replacing tasks rather than specific service desk roles. So ultimately, at least in the short term, who knows what's going to happen longer term, this technology is here to improve the work lives of everyone rather than to replace them in the workplace. So it's important to communicate this, and failing to do so is just going to be a classic organizational change management mistake where we don't communicate enough and resistance builds up and we don't get the change that we wanted to get. And then the tip that's on here, and I think this is really important, that traditionally when we've introduced new technology, we've often taken the manual and automated it. But with AI and automation, it's important not to be constrained by the status quo, that we shouldn't simply replace the existing manual practices with technology, that we should look to do more. Perhaps we can find opportunities that weren't previously possible. For example, one that I like to use a lot, that I heard at a presentation from someone else, so I stole it from elsewhere and slightly modified it in my defense, is the use of natural language processing to listen in on service desk calls. So you're not engaging with the technology via the keyboard, the technology is listening in while you're also listening to the employee or customer talking to the issue or the need. And you don't need to capture what they're saying. The technology can do it. And then it can also proactively offer up knowledge and recommendations to help that service desk analyst to better serve the employee or customer that they're dealing with. Hopefully that made sense. Number 6, and I seem to be on time, which is a good thing. And again, we're still talking about the employees. It's very much around the fact that, well, hopefully we all know that our metrics drive our behaviors, that not exactly Pavlov's dog, but we work, we might even think relative to how we're ultimately going to be measured or how our performance is going to be measured or how our outcomes are going to be measured. You know, for example, that a metric that calls for speed is likely going to result in just that, so we'll end up with a low average handling time. But then you've got a question, at what cost? We did things quickly, but what's the impact in terms of employee productivity, that's end user productivity, or the outcome at a business level? So we might have saved time and money within IT, but there might have been a bigger, far worse cost at a business level. And it's one of those things where it's always going to be a balancing act to ensure that there's the right portfolio of metrics to motivate people to do the right things. So for instance, at the moment, we tend to use customer satisfaction or CSAT as a leveler to ensure that what we're doing isn't adversely affecting the service we provide. But hopefully, as I pointed out in the employee experience section, CSAT, while it works, could be a lot better if we take that employee experience view. And importantly, right now, as we think about all of this change that we're already going through, might have been through some of it as well, or will potentially go through, that being able to have the right metrics that ultimately drive the right behaviors is getting more complicated with things like value focus that are covered. There's the complexity of understanding what different business stakeholders deem to be a value, and hence how your IT service desk can or should be creating value. And we need metrics that are going to affect the motivations as well as the right performance measures to feedback that we are doing the right things with the right outcomes again, through that value-based lens, or with employee experience, say. I showed 2 metrics that are currently monitored by Happy Signals. Most organizations won't be measuring employee happiness. They won't be measuring lost productivity. So there's the opportunity to bolster or even to replace some existing metrics with things that allow you to better understand the employee experience that's currently offered, to identify issues, to identify improvement opportunities, and to improve that. And importantly, it isn't just about the happiness of the people that we support and serve. It's very much about ultimately delivering those better business outcomes. And, I could say the same thing about AI and automation as well, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to jump to the tip. Or before that, I'm actually going to stick my neck out and suggest that even without these changes or potential changes, it's probably time to review existing metrics anyway, even before we consider what's happening. So the tip is a pretty obvious one, that if you're not already doing it, there's a need to regularly review your metric portfolio with this based on a set of agreed, probably business-focused criteria, I would suggest, and to include in that the understanding of how these metrics are not only communicating your performance and your successes, but also how they're driving both positive and negative behaviors in IT support staff. It's the last leg now, the last 2 parts. So the sharing capabilities beyond IT, I could have put Enterprise Service Manager on there, but not everybody is aware of the term. For those of you that aren't, it's the use of IT service management principles and capabilities in other business areas. And the aim is to improve performance, service, and ultimately outcomes. So you might have HR, facilities, legal, security, marketing. The list can be as long as you want it to be. Also operationally as well, things that are specific to your organization. They can use these service management capabilities and also the enabling technology to help them to serve and support the people that they need to interact with. And it's something that really is riding on the crest of a wave at the moment. Our 2019 Future of ITSM survey from the middle of last year found that 2/3 of organizations either have or are planning to develop an enterprise service management strategy. And we continue to see that growth, with a big driver, funny enough, being digital transformation. If you think about it, it has 3 parts. So you've got the improved products and services based on exploitation of technology and data. You've got, sorry, did I say improved? I should have said new. You've got improved customer engagement mechanisms, again, based on the use of technology and data. But you've also got the need for better back office operations. And it's this back office digital transformation that is very similar to enterprise service management. So enterprise service management is actually happening on the back of digital transformation rather than it always being a thing in itself. And while I've been waffling there, you've probably been looking at the percentages on the screen. And this is HDI data, slightly older than I want it to be. It's from Q4 2018, but I still believe it to be relevant. It shows what's being adopted ITSM process-wise across other parts of the organization. And what you'll see is it's very service desk heavy. And therefore, for me, it places an onus on the IT service desk and its personnel to ensure that what they do, or what they should be doing, because we don't always do what we should be doing, is fit for purpose before we share it with other parts of the organization, i.e. with those other business functions, HR, facilities, etc. And it's very much what this tip is about here, that we have to get our IT support capabilities right, as good as they could be, before we start to share them with other parts of the organization. If we don't stand up to be counted here, whoever's running that enterprise service management strategy or the back office digital transformation initiative might think, right, let's pick up what we currently do and extend it throughout the rest of the business. But we might be sharing things that are possibly suboptimal. For example, I used self-service or self-service portal in the Happy Signals data earlier on. And If you look at your IT self-service capability, if it's not being used as much as it could be, probably due to how it was launched and marketed, maybe a bit about how it was designed, then why are you going to share that with other parts of the organization? Because you are just going to be sharing what is a suboptimal capability with other parts of the organization, and it's going to do nobody any good, and it's going to do IT's reputation no good on the back of it. And then the final of the 8 areas to look at, consider, and hopefully take action on in 2020 is that of playing an information security role. And this might seem a bit of an odd one to add to my list, but when you stop to think about it, there's very few people that work in your IT organization that aren't aware of the risks and impact of security breaches and other security risks. Even other people that work in your organization as a whole, that we read so much about it day to day and see it on the news, in papers, online, etc., that we all know that organizations are at risk, and we can see things like data breaches, etc. So the question that I have for you is your IT service desk doing enough in terms of playing the role it needs to play in information security? And I've put 2 truncated quotes from a guy called Stuart Rance. He's an ITIL and cybersecurity author and consultant that I know and love, and whatever he writes is normally great stuff. And there were 2 things that he wrote. I think it was probably sometime in 2019. I didn't actually get a link to the quotes. The first is that a service desk that doesn't contribute to information security may be part of the problem rather than part of the solution, making security breaches more likely and resulting in higher impact when breaches do occur. Makes sense to me. And then the second one, again, which is truncated on my slide, a great service desk can make a huge difference to how your organization is protected. And thinking about the right precautions for your organization just might save you from being yet another organization that suffers from the embarrassment of a major security breach. I think the embarrassment is just the small part of it. I think the customer impact and the potential financial impact is probably far more hurtful than the embarrassment. But for me, they're both great examples of the oft-quoted statement that everyone is responsible for security, or security is everyone's responsibility. You see it flipped too. And for me, for service desk analysts, there are 2 key information security aspects to consider. The first is how they keep the organization secure themselves. So it's how they personally adhere to the corporate information security policies in everything they do. And then secondly, the role that they play in helping to ensure that others are not putting the organization at risk. And this can cover a variety of things. So they can be involved in handling security incidents, say, the efficiency and effectiveness that they do that with. And then there are preventative elements that they can play a part in too. So communicating information security policies, messages, even high priority alerts, or even just being vigilant when diagnosing the causes of incidents or remotely removing unauthorized software, say. So there are a number of places in their day-to-day activities where they can actually, just think, is this potentially a security risk? Is there something here that actually has happened? The horse has already bolted, that we ought to report to the appropriate people. So for me, there is that information security role that it would almost be remiss of us as IT service desk professionals not to play. So in terms of the final tip, and then I can hand over to Brian, and I think I'll probably just about finish on the 40 minutes, is basically everything I've just said, really. Take the time to assess what you currently do as an IT service desk in playing a role in your corporate information security capabilities. And based on what you find, there'll be things that hopefully you can add to, things that you might need to amend. Just change your practices to play your part when it comes to information security. So I've probably spoken extremely quickly, rambled a little bit in the last 40 minutes, but hopefully I've given you a lot to consider in terms of the slides and the words that I've shared today. There's, of course, going to be other things, other aspects of your IT service desk capabilities that might be at the top of your 2020 priorities for improvement. But hopefully I've given you some food for thought, something helpful to take away across those 3 groupings and the 8 different areas and the tips that apply to each of those. So thank you again for listening, and I'll be back for Q&A should we have time at the end. So I think I'm going to hand back to Sarah, who will then hand back to Brian.
I think I'll just take it right away if that's okay. And
all yours, Brian. Jump on in.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. And I do apologize for the harsh transition from the Queen's English to a Southern drawl, but I'll talk fast as well, and we'll get through these. Point 8 is where I sit on all of this, and where it's really important to me that the service desk understands their importance in the overall IT security posture. And it's important enough that a company called Bomgar, which is who we are, so Bomgar and Beyond Trust came together. Bomgar had already transitioned from a remote support company to a security company, because that's where we play. So when we look at that and we start that conversation, we see that PAM can be a very important part of the service desk, and it really sits in these last 2 points, but it really involves all 3. So for every service desk, there's privileged passwords. So the fact that most service desks have an admin account on every workstation and a password associated with that account is very vulnerable to lateral movement within the organization, and is a key target for organizations that are trying to infiltrate a company. And then endpoint management, where you sit for your users and the rights that they have on their workstations, their ability to install apps, their ability to do things, whether or not they have admin rights and how excessive those rights are. And then finally, kind of the hard outer shell, the remote support functionality, and that ability to remote control a computer. And that may fall more into the other ways that you could do it, may create a vulnerability within the environment. And to highlight kind of that whole conversation about where service desk sits in that model, I usually quip that any organization is only secure, or is only as secure as their most careless, or whatever other word, I might use the word dumb sometimes inappropriately, but is their careless employee. So one employee's carelessness of downloading an application they shouldn't, allowing an entry point into the network, and then the proliferation throughout the network from there can really be a big deal. So the service desk plays a couple of roles there, as mentioned by Stephen. One, in just their use of the products and what they do on a day-to-day basis, and then just the example that they set and the education they give to their end users. So Beyond Trust as a company has 3 pillars of focus that we work on, and those include passwords, endpoints, and access. As we talk about the access piece, we're going to talk about endpoints and access today. As we talk about the access piece, what we're really talking about is remote control. How do I get on someone else's system, or how do I let someone else, such as a vendor, into my network to work on a particular application or a particular server? How are we going to control those connections? And we've seen for years that remote access is the first attack vector, or the #1 attack vector in a lot of these data breaches. So there's port scanning that goes on. The example I gave of one employee being compromised, they then will port scan within your network. So it's not just a firewall problem, it's a within your network problem as well. So the attacker can find the other tools on your network and move laterally with those. So remote access being the entry point, sometimes, not always, but certainly you can find examples of it. And then the second piece of that, where we talk about credentials, somewhere along the way, this says 80% involves privileged credentials. There are studies out there by Mandiant that say 100%. Somewhere in the attack chain exists a privileged credential. And so I need that credential to get ultimately to the data that I'm after. So both of those pieces are near and dear to the service desk's heart because those are the tools you need to do your job. So in order to keep those and to do the things that we need to do, we need to be on the forefront of security and protect the organization as best we can. So as we look at secure remote access, in particular, give you some key points to look for and some key points about our solution in general. So with the Beyond Trust Remote Support product, you can do support for employees both on and off network. So someone traveling in a hotel room or someone sitting at their desk, it's the same tool. There's a log in one place to go look at. That includes all of your devices, so Windows, Mac, Linux, and your mobile devices. If you have to use a different tool for each of those, you have problems with configuration maintenance and things like that that can lead to a security breach. The credentials, once again, being very important, are the remote support tool itself can vault credentials. I'd encourage every organization to consider vaulting your .admin credential if you're using, for in my case, a bhood and a bhood.admin that has admin rights on a remote workstation. Vault that, rotate that password after every session, and that way if it is compromised during a session for whatever reason, it can't be used to keep going through the network. Achieve compliance. So security and compliance always go hand in hand. Compliance is just proving security. So the ability to have those logs and review those logs. Secure by design, our tool starts with an appliance-based architecture that's single tenant. Our cloud offering is single tenant as well. So in each of those examples, the customer has an individual appliance with a hardened architecture for providing remote support. And then vendor access can kind of cross two products for us, both a remote support product and a privileged remote access product. But use a tool that puts you in control. So many vendors want to use their tool, but you lose some of the control, you lose some of the audit, and this gives you a way to let people in at the appropriate times with the appropriate permissions and the proper oversight as they do that type of support. And much like Stephen did a couple times accidentally, I kind of stole my thunder for the next slide. So we do kind of divide those into the two products. Remote support being the service desk product for providing employee support. And then privileged remote access, if you're not familiar with that at all, we built on much of the platform of remote support, but added in privileged workflow for using credentials. We added workflow for allowing access for access just when it's needed and not all the time. Another thing we do like to talk about that can help with both security and productivity and in that upping of the employee experience for a service desk agent is the ability to integrate with an ITSM system. So if you think about what would be the best scenario for you and a user needs help, and whether it's the walk-up help or the chat, or if you start with something AI and try to solve their problem for them, if we start with a chat, if we then go into support with an actual technician, if we do that in the context of an incident from an incident management system, we can collect all that data in one place. And much of the data that we lose, service desk agents will occasionally type, "I fixed it" in a ticket, but we can actually collect a recording of the screen while the session was being done, and we can collect the chat transcript back and forth between the users, and it gives us an electronic way to follow that incident all the way through its life. So the other piece that we'd like to cover, so that being access, is endpoint. And admittedly, this is not one that the service desk has been involved in as much as they should be. So we think of excessive end user privileges on these end devices as an entry point to the network, all your users out there, wherever they may be. And it's really an ultimate question of, are they an admin or are they not? And so as we look at the statistics for that, with as long as Windows has been around, we still had we had 499, so almost 500 vulnerabilities last year. 169 were considered critical. If the user simply did not have admin rights on their workstation, the risk of that vulnerability was mitigated. So It was only vulnerable when the local user was an admin. Now, I will highlight that .admin account I mentioned, if you are on there as an admin, then that risk exists again. So just be aware of that and be careful with that. So by this very question, the end user being an admin on their workstation just greatly increases the risk within your organization. So it's a simple question on its surface. They still have their admin rights, or their admin rights have been removed. But it's really not that simple, because this question's been answered several different ways. And if you're on the left and admin rights are still granted, that's something you need to attack right away. That's something that your organization should have wanted to do for a long time. And what I'm going to show you in just a moment is a way you can do it. So the only reason that would be the case is you've got an end user issue of lost productivity, or in applications that don't work without admin rights, and you need to solve those problems, and we've got a way for you to do that. On the right side, this directly affects the service desk. Admin rights have been removed, and that could have happened 15 years ago, or it could have happened yesterday, whichever the case may be. When that happens, the end user experience takes a big hit. They can no longer install a printer at home. They can no longer maybe update a piece of software that they really do need to update. So ultimately, it becomes this balancing act of, are they underlocked, but they can do the things they need to do, or have you just taken away everything? They're air quotes secure, but we begin to find ways around that. And so in that category to the right of you've removed admin rights, I would challenge you to, if it was a long time ago, to relook at this, to encourage your IT security group to relook at this. How much privilege creep have you had? How many have you given accounts to, or given their rights back, or given them an alternate account that has admin rights? All of that is privilege creep, where you've given things back and things are once again vulnerable. And then the very last point that I have in that column is the service desk's tickets increase. So let's pretend you're one of the ones that did it 15 years ago. Your IT organization was on the ball, and they put this in place. Well, the end result was the service desk took the hit for that. The users think of the service desk as IT. They're mad because they can't install something, but ultimately it's a problem with productivity for both of you, because they have to call when they need to install a printer. They have to call when a driver needs updating. So there's this constant battle of overlocked, underlocked, and how do we help the user and up the employee experience for the end user. So what endpoint privilege management does, so a product installed at the desktop for both Windows and Mac. There are also Linux, Unix products as well, but they elevate individual applications, not the users. So if we think of a scenario where we have a legacy application within our environment, it requires admin rights, so we had to leave everybody with admin rights. Well, let's take that away, and when that application runs, and we can do it by its signing certificate, by its location on disk, all of those things, we can decide that that particular application should be allowed to run elevated. And that goes for each of the things that you can think of, and you probably can come up with 5 right off the bat that you're getting tickets for every day, that if users could simply do them themselves, it would be much better. It'd be a better situation, and the risk of them doing it is minimal at best. So we have policies in place with these tools. Typically, the objection of both IT and the service desk is the time it takes to implement it. We have policies for quickly getting them implemented and giving you a quick start to the process and to the project. One other thing that it will do that gets missed a little bit is the opposite's true as well. Lo and behold, without admin rights, we can install Google Chrome and some of the uTorrent tools and things like that. A UAC prompt comes up, but they hit cancel and it installs anyway, and that's installing into user data folders. We can prevent that as well, and those often create either security vulnerability or a ticket into the service desk as well. So elevate the applications, not the users, track and control applications, and then we can integrate that with other endpoint security tools. And there are several ways to manage the policies and the logging of those things. So altogether, the last piece is passwords. Don't have individual slides for that, but think about that .admin account, what you're using it for, and the vulnerabilities that exist for it. Rotate it often, and just really protect the .admin accounts that the service desk has. I've done demonstrations of live hacks where if I can get a user to click on an executable, and I have that one point into your network, the next thing I need is a credential I can move laterally with. My favorite would be a service desk credential. I break something on their computer, you log in with a credential that has admin rights, and if you don't protect that credential, rotate it often, I can then begin to move laterally. As a whole, we have almost 20,000 customers. We're market leader. We have a broad portfolio for PAM. Our new approach to this is universal PAM, and that's just control over everything from the end user all the way through to the servers. And as a call to action, we would like you to download the remote support buyer's guide that we have as an available attachment in the attachments panel, and we'd love to talk to you and maybe show you some of these products and even demonstrate some of them or let you use them in your environment. And with that, I'll hand back to Sarah for the Q&A part of the
Thank you
session.
so much, Brian. Yeah, appreciate it. And you guys, just to reiterate that the remote support buyer's guide is attached in the handout section right now, so you can access it, but we will also be emailing that to you in the follow-up email that you will receive in a couple of business days from now. So at this point, I'm going to launch our poll of the session. If you are interested in being contacted by Beyond Trust about scheduling a personalized one-on-one demo to see either a remote support product or endpoint privilege management product or password product, please select yes, and somebody will reach out to you to schedule out that demo. Let's dive into a couple of questions. We have just a couple of minutes left, so let me dive into what the audience was asking about. Stephen, just make sure you're off of mute now, and can you tell us what is the value of our IT service desk?
This is one of the things I tried to articulate it somewhat in the presentation itself, in that it's an easy question to ask and a difficult question to answer. And unfortunately, it's a case of it being a consultant-like answer, because it's always going to be, it depends, because it's going to depend on your organization's approach. And that could be on a spectrum of, we want a low-cost service desk, just quickly resolves IT issues and gets on with things, to one that actually wants to deliver a high-quality service with a superior employee experience that recognizes the fact that it's not an IT issue. It's a people issue. It's actually a business issue when the technology is not working. So you've got to factor that in. You've then also got to factor in what I was talking about in terms of different stakeholders having different perceptions and different needs when it comes to value. So, for example, a sales VP and their team, or a lawyer who just want to be back up and running as quickly as possible, will probably deem that to be the most important facet of IT support, and what it costs to allow them to do that is probably nigh on irrelevant, because it's going to be minimal compared to the sort of money that's either being spent in terms of their time or the sort of revenues that could hang on them being able to do their job as and when they need to do it. So to say that there's one thing or one way to describe the value of your IT service desk, there isn't. And I'm sort of hoping that eventually, and I'm not seeing it yet, it might be in some of the newer ITIL 4 books, that we do have some industry level advice as to how to go about ascertaining, what value means to a variety of stakeholders within your organization. And as I said in the tip, the only way to do it, to get to a solution, other than listening to me rambling to not get to a solution, is to ask the people who are going to determine whether you're delivering value and how good that value is or not, to have that conversation, to have the dialogues. And even if you're just starting with a simple scoring mechanism, you know, a 0 to 10 or a 1 to 10, you know, where do you rate us for value? At least it gives you a starting point to try and move the dial up such that you're focusing on the right things, you're doing the right things, you're delivering the right outcomes, such that you can be perceived to be creating that value or delivering that value that your organization is going to increasingly expect from you. Sorry if it was a waffly, well, it was a waffly answer, but there isn't one single thing that you can say. Actually, just one final thing to say on this. You know, you can actually look to things that are specific to your organization. So, for instance, if you're a vehicle or car manufacturing organization, the level of lost productivity in terms of output that can be attributed to IT issues, bringing that down can be a sign of greater value from IT support. Or if you're a healthcare organization, one of the scary or horrible metrics that can be used is the level of patient deaths that can be attributed to IT or technology or equipment failures. And again, minimizing that, hopefully making it zero, is another way to better demonstrate the value you are delivering to the organization, rather than the number of tickets or average handling time or cost per ticket or first contact resolution. They're things that are materially helping the organization as a whole. Sorry, very long answer.
No worries. Okay, guys, so we are a couple of minutes past the top of the hour, so I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time today. So I'm going to wrap it up. If there are any unanswered questions left from the audience, we will reach out to you individually, get those answered. So just a reminder that we will be sending the post-webinar email containing links to the recording, the slides, and the buyer's guide that we showed today. Within 2 business days from now, it will be sent to the email with which you registered for this webinar. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you to our experts today and to everybody who attended live. We really appreciate you guys spending the last hour with us and your day with us. So have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. We'll see you at our next webinar. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.